In this video, I'm going to answer the question, what should I do with my life? Now, to answer this question, one of the first things that you should ask yourself is, do you want to be a regular 9-to-5 employee who works for someone else, or do you want to be an entrepreneur and run your own business? To help you figure out which one you are, I'll start by doing the following. I'm going to go ahead and say that you, the viewer out there, are definitely in this 95%. You're destined to be an employee who works for someone else. Now, if your reaction to me saying that to you is, well, I guess, maybe I am, then that means that you definitely are in this 95%. But if your reaction was something more like, who is this random guy on YouTube telling me what to do? He doesn't know anything. Look at his male pattern baldness, then it's much more likely that you're over here in this category. Having said that, this is still not a certainty. You might still be over here in this category. And if you're still not sure which category you're in, go ahead and watch my How to Become a 37-Year-Old Broke Loser video. If you watch that video and you still want to become an entrepreneur, then you just might have what it takes to become one. For the rest of this video, I'm going to focus on advice that's mostly intended for the 95% audience. In the future, I'll probably do a separate video for the 5%. Now, for the 95% group, the standard piece of advice that these people usually get is to follow your passion. I think that this is not very great advice for the following reasons. If you repeatedly tell a young person who has no knowledge or experience of the world to find your passion, they'll most likely do just as you asked and come up with something. But the problem is, most of these young people don't have enough exposure to the world to even know what jobs exist in the first place, let alone which ones they'd actually be passionate about. Most of them will just end up giving stereotypical answers that they've heard about before, like doctor, lawyer, firefighter, software developer. I think a lot of people, the 95%, don't really have an inbuilt passion that they're born with. But if you repeatedly tell children that they have to have one, you'll probably be successful in peer pressuring them into thinking that. And the reasoning process of a child will probably go something like this. I really like listening to music. I guess I'm passionate about music. Well, guess I'll dedicate the rest of my life to becoming a musician. But unless there's enough demand for the music that you produce, you just might end up being poor for the rest of your life, due to a single decision error that you made as a teenager. Many young people make the same kind of selection bias with other career fields as well, simply because these fields are more visible to them, like YouTuber, video game developer, streamer, influencer. And that's why the first piece of advice that I want to give to the young people who are in the 95% is that your worldview about what careers exist is probably too narrow. You should step back to realize that everything that you see around you was created and orchestrated by human beings. This microphone was designed and created by human beings working at jobs. This whiteboard was manufactured, packaged, shipped, and then sold by human beings working at jobs. Somebody working at a job made this paper, and someone poured the foundation of the building that I'm standing in right now. You should realize that you can do this analysis with every piece of material that you see around you. And it's not just about the physical outputs either. Someone has to do the analysis and decision-making about what products to actually make and how to sell them. So, to truly figure out how you should go about developing your career, I'd suggest doing an analysis that's similar to the following. Specifically, a focus on evaluating the relative supply and demand for given jobs in your area. For example, I did a job search just now on LinkedIn for a construction worker, and the result came back with 19 jobs. I also tried to estimate the approximate number of able-bodied people in the Kitchener-Waterloo area who would be capable of doing such a job, and the figure that I came up with was around 125,000. Now, for each of the jobs, we'll take the number of people who could possibly do that job and divide it by the number of jobs that exist in that category. For a construction worker, this comes out to 6,578. So if everyone in the local area lost their jobs, and everyone was competing for these 19 jobs, this is the number of eligible people who you'd be competing with. Next, I did the same job search for food services, and came up with a figure of 49 jobs. And I estimated that there are approximately 250,000 people in the area who could perform such a job. So the ratio of supply and demand for food services is 5,102 people per job. Next, I did the same thing for software developer. For this one, my estimates are even more rough, since I had to filter out a number of jobs that weren't local. But carrying through with the same estimation process, I came up with the figure of around 40 jobs, 10,000 eligible people who could do those jobs, which gives about 250 eligible people per job. And carrying through with the same kind of analysis leaves me with these numbers. Now, it's worth emphasizing that these numbers depend very much on where you live, and they change all the time. And a few of these numbers are borderline made up, so you'll have to do your own analysis. The point here is just to show the process, and it's also important to make sure that you don't misunderstand the data. This figure of 6,578 is not really the number of people that you'd be competing with every time you apply for a job, because at any given time, most of these people already have jobs, and the construction industry as a whole employs a lot of people to begin with. The same observations are true for food services, and for fields like software developer or accountant, you can see that there's much less competition. But these industries are also smaller overall. It also requires a massive upfront investment in time and money to get started in these fields. I also looked for jobs for YouTubers and streamers, but I didn't see any positions available. And the results are similar for musicians. I think it would be better to categorize these career paths as entrepreneurship. Another observation to make is that career paths for which there is a large supply or demand are likely to be more statistically significant. You would expect the earnings that you would make as a construction worker, of which there are hundreds of thousands, to be much more stable than that of a video game developer. At any given time, there are likely hundreds of thousands of construction workers in the country, but likely only thousands of video game developers. So when the video game industry is doing well, you'll make a lot of money. But when it crashes, you'll probably have to switch fields for a while. The other very important thing that this analysis doesn't take into account is how much money you make at the job. So if you want to do an even better job at this analysis, you could consider adding additional columns. You could add another column to normalize the supply-demand imbalance according to how much money the job makes. Or you could consider other factors, like how intrinsically talented you are at performing that job, or how much you want to do the job in the first place. Something that's very much underappreciated is that these numbers can vary wildly depending on where you are. For example, I've heard that in Poland, their technology sector is doing unexpectedly well lately. And in general, the technology sector of Europe is very different compared to that of the States. Salaries in the technology sector of the United States are notoriously higher than those found in Europe. But at the same time, Europe is known for having a more laid-back work culture. So, reflecting on the numbers that you see in this table, does this mean that you shouldn't pursue your passion in music? Well, not necessarily. It depends on a lot of factors. If you're 6 feet tall and built like a bodybuilder, you're naturally more talented at working in construction than most people, whether you like it or not. You'll get hired easier, be more likely to be promoted, and probably less likely to be laid off. On the other hand, if you're physically weak, and you like to spend all day indoors debugging computer programs, and you enjoy this 100 times more than anyone else you've ever met, then software development is probably your thing instead. The important thing is to identify where your intrinsic strengths are, and this is not always obvious. A lot of people don't have good self-awareness to identify when they're exceptionally good at something, because it comes so naturally to them. And at the same time, it's not just about being intrinsically good at something. Even if you're not particularly good at something, if you want to do that thing 100 times more than anyone else, you'll probably still be successful. This is what I'd call being truly passionate about something. But by definition, this excludes 95% of people. So the takeaway is, you might say that you're passionate about something, but are you sure about that? If you were in a room with 100 other people who do the same thing, could you say that you're in the top 3 most motivated? Now, another significant point that isn't talked about nearly enough is that it's very difficult to know what a job actually involves on a day-to-day basis in advance. What you think a job is and what the job actually is are often quite different, and this can make it very difficult to figure out if you're actually passionate about it or not. For example, you might say that you like working with kids and teaching them things, so you decide to become a kindergarten teacher. But then you discover that a lot of your job is taken up by managing classroom behavior, or dealing with physical and mental health issues that the students have. You also have to do public relations by interacting with crazy parents. And given what I said before, I might have misled you into thinking that software developers spend all of their time writing software. However, in the corporate world, you'll spend a lot of time in meetings, and have long discussions with people to collect requirements. You also might say that you're passionate about helping people with their medical issues, so you want to become a doctor. But once you go into the profession, you may discover that that's only a small percentage of the job, and you spend a lot of time filling out paperwork. Another thing that I don't think is talked about enough is that you can suddenly become passionate about a job if you see the results of your work and the positive impact it has. This was something that I realized after the time I spent teaching at the college. And another insight about a lot of the advice that young people receive is that much of it can be divided into matriarchal or patriarchal advice. Much of the matriarchal advice tends to focus on the needs of the child. I think that this is where all the focus on finding your passion comes from, and the patriarchal advice tends to focus on the needs of society. In other words, who cares about your passion? Get out there and do something useful. The stereotypical perspective is that the mother gives the matriarchal advice to find your passion, and the father tells you to get out there and do something useful. However, that's not always consistent, and sometimes the roles are reversed, or missing one or both perspectives entirely. In reality, I think that both perspectives are important. Now, these days, everyone is also worried about AI, and wondering if it's going to take all of our jobs. If you go back to prehistory, the first jobs involved satisfying the minimum requirements for survival. Things like finding wood to burn for heat and foraging for food. And today, the overall picture is still basically the same. It's just that the supply chain of how that's accomplished is a bit more complicated. As far as I'm concerned, jobs are equivalent to problems. And as long as we have problems in society, we will have jobs that consist of solving those problems. And if you hadn't noticed recently, we currently have a lot of problems in society that need solving. So maybe we could make some jobs that consist of solving those problems. Having said that, I do have some concerns about changes in our society related to how the value of our work is actually being captured. Historically, if you built a small farm in the middle of the woods to grow your own food, you'd get to keep 100% of the value that you create. But today, there are fewer and fewer avenues to fully capture the value of your hard work. Increasingly, all of the value that we produce goes towards taxes, fees, or is outright stolen and incorporated into the dataset of an artificial intelligence model. But until the AIs can start paying your rent, buying your groceries, and providing you with free medical care, someone is going to have to do the work to keep society running. Some people say that we're all just going to live on universal basic income, and that the government is going to give us $2,000 a month to pay our rent. That sounds pretty nice, but I think that as soon as we get universal basic income, the rent amount will simply go up by whatever the universal basic income amount is, and we'll still have all the exact same problems in society that we used to. Now, one final note to give you a bit of hope. I think it's quite interesting how even today, there are still open positions for call center jobs. Given the nature of call center work, I think that this job is a fairly good bellwether to inform us about whether AI really is coming to take all of our jobs. I think if that really was the case, all of these call center jobs would have been fully replaced a year or two ago. But as you can see, they're still hiring even today. Surely, AI will make the number of call center jobs go down over time. But the fact that this number is measurably going down slowly tells us that we have a bit of breathing room before the AI fully takes over. Now, in making your decision about what to dedicate your life to, it's extremely important to get high-quality information. So I'll end this video by showing all of you socially awkward Zoomers how to do cold calls, where you just pick up the phone and call a random plumber and ask them for career advice. To maximize your odds of success, be sure to do the following. Prepare a list of questions to ask them ahead of time, and think of a simple 2-sentence introduction to quickly and clearly explain why you're calling. And be considerate that they might be busy and don't want to talk to you. Here's an example of my introduction. Hi, this might be kind of a random question, but I work with a lot of young people who are always asking me for career advice. And if you're not too busy, could I ask you a couple questions about the career path of plumbing and the current state of the industry? And for you, I'd suggest using something similar to the following. Hi, I'm a local high school student. I'm trying to learn more about the career path of plumbing. Can I ask you a few questions if you're not too busy? For my analysis, I called a total of 8 different plumbing companies. 3 of them went to voicemail, and 5 of them answered the phone. 4 out of the 5 calls were answered by a dispatch person or secretary, and not an actual plumber. In 2 cases, they asked for my number and said that the plumber would call me back, but he never did. In 1 case, the person immediately hung up on me. In another case, the person was busy and didn't want to talk to me.
I don't have time for this. I'm leaving out of the office shortly and I'm very busy.
No worries.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
If someone seems upset or is not interested in talking to you, just thank them for their time and move on. When you're asking random people for free advice, nobody owes you anything, and you can't blame them for not wanting to waste their time. On the other hand, you'll be surprised at how willing people are to talk to you for a long period of time if you catch them at the right moment and if they're in the right mood. Even though most of the people that answered my calls were secretaries, I was still able to get a couple useful nuggets of information from talking to them.
We are always looking for people. There's never enough in the trades here.
Okay. Interesting. 2 of the 5 companies that actually answered the phone told me that they were currently hiring. Overall, I think that the success rate was quite good for just doing 8 cold calls. It might be disheartening when someone is angry or hangs up on you, but overall, it doesn't actually set you back in life. On the other hand, if you catch the right person at the right time, it might lead to a conversation that changes the entire course of your career. Obviously, you can also just watch YouTube and TikTok videos all day to learn about prospective career fields. But this data is biased and may not accurately represent the job market in your area. I also think you have to be increasingly wary of sensationalized or ill-informed social media content giving career advice. Many of the famous day in the life of videos were created as a sort of bragging competition for the author to be perceived as a high-status person with an easy life. These types of videos likely gloss over the less glamorous details of the job. Articles that you see in the mainstream media favoring a particular career path are usually just low-effort opinion pieces written by people who have no long-term stake in the game. At best, some of them are just following the current trend and media cycle. At worst, some of them might be outright propaganda, whose goal is to lower labor costs or to sell low-quality college degree programs. I should also re-emphasize that I didn't try very hard to be accurate in coming up with the data in my spreadsheet, so don't actually try to use these numbers. The goal here is just to give you some kind of starting point and show how you could actually sit down and analyze this problem. If you're super desperate for a job and have nothing to do, you could make your full-time job consist of building a much higher quality version of this dataset. I also didn't take into account how many of these job listings might be fake or potentially mislabeled. It would also make more sense to consider after-tax income instead of gross income, as well as the different living expenses for jobs that require urban locations. For the last column, I tried to provide some kind of overall scoring metric, although what I came up with is somewhat arbitrary, so feel free to criticize it in the comments. In Canada, the median income is around $45,000. Every dollar that you spend in your life will eventually, directly or indirectly, become someone else's salary at their job. When considering your career path, you should ask the question, what's the breakdown of where that money goes? How much of your salary ends up as cement in the building that you live in, or the bridges that you drive over? How much of your salary do you spend on your car? Or how about on food? And how much of your salary do you spend on musicians and video game streamers? Imagine if you were stranded on an island with 100 other people, and you had to figure out which members of the group would do each and every job. A few of these people would probably end up doing jobs that they wouldn't initially describe themselves as passionate about, but people would pay them handsomely for their work because the work needs to get done. But realize that you really are in fact stranded on an island with a bunch of other people right now. It's just that the island is quite big, and there are a lot more than 100 other people.